So several years ago, I was actually approached by a woman called Sasha Powell at Christchurch University in the UK regarding an international project. And Sasha coordinated the group of us, and we applied for funding from the Froebel Trust. And it's very difficult, as I'm sure you know anything to do with money, it's very difficult to get support, particularly for this age group. So in 2017, we were delighted to be accepted. Infant care is an area that has been under-researched and focusing on the ideas underpinning a teacher's practice, pedagogies of care. So we're not looking specifically at children, but we're looking at why do teachers do the things that they do. So the role of a caregiver in the past was often associated with care given by those without a professional qualification. But we now have a curriculum that asks us to articulate and demonstrate a pedagogy of care. So we're looking at what that involves. So not only our thanks go to the Froebel Trust, but to the wonderful directors, teachers and parents across the world who joined us in our endeavours, along with the universities that have supported our research. So I'm going to start with, what am I going to start with?
Right.
Right, the project, Pedagogies of Care. So basically it's to understand and describe how pedagogies are articulated and demonstrated, and it's to compare and contrast the pedagogies in different cultural contexts, you can read this, as a means to prompt multi-vocal dialogue and reflection, which simply means these different layers of teachers, parents, other teachers in other countries. So that's the multivocal. And to describe the different constituents of a situated pedagogy in the context of a globalised discourse, inspired greatly by Joseph Tobin's comparative ethnography. And that is really inspiring. If you haven't read anything by Joe Tobin, go for it. It's really great. Okay, so the next shot then is about Froebelian principles. Obviously, if we're funded by the Froebel Trust in the United Kingdom, it's important for us to highlight those principles, and they're ones that you can really relate to in New Zealand. The integrity of childhood in its own right, not about being an apprentice to adulthood, but a child having their own childhood in this very moment, and we can relate to that in New Zealand. The relationships, the uniqueness of children, holistic nature, role of play and creativity, and the rights of children for protection and to the promotion of their overall well-being. So these are things that, in terms of Te Whāriki, we can really relate to. The project team. Well, here we all are, grinning away. Sasha, on the left there. Sasha from the UK, who's a fantastic leader. And she organises the Skype meetings that we have monthly, and she's just got a heart of gold. Wonderful woman. Mary McMullen in Indiana in University in the US, Carrie in Hong Kong, and myself and Maria in New Zealand. Don't we brush up well? It's quite impressive, really.
Okay, so given that we were researchers from 4 different countries, the UK, sorry Jane.
That's okay.
UK, the USA, New Zealand and Hong Kong, we had, one of our biggest challenges was to develop a sense of coherence across the team itself and to ensure effective communication when we were separated by geographical location. So we looked to the online space to help us with this and the use of certain software, and one of the most common methods of bringing people together in the online space for a meeting is the Skype software. Zoom is another method that we could have been equally effective. The Skype meetings were really interesting. They enabled us 5 researchers from different countries to come together and in real time to have this conversation. And what that meant was we had a sense of flow in our dialogue. There was no delay in our responding to one another, listening to each other's points of view. We could even engage in quite a focused discussion about things through the Skype method. But what we soon found out by organising our first meeting was that a lunchtime meeting for one of us meant a midnight meeting for another. So I want to point out that Sasha, who's our lead, was often in her nightgown because she took the midnight shift on our behalf. We did take turns. It was pretty exhausting to stay up after midnight to have this really focused analytical discussion. So we were grateful to Sasha. Complementing that method, we used email. So email was another useful way of communicating, but there's some delay with email, especially because we were working in different time zones. So this was useful in between our Skype meetings. It meant we could seek clarification, ask questions, seek feedback from one another. But we knew that we had to wait a while before, for the next person to wake up and see their emails and so forth. Right at the beginning of the project, we needed to find a secure online cloud-based site that was going to be secure and hold our project information and store our data. So our data, there's a lot of video footage, photos, centre documentation, and our reflective notes and analyses. All of this to us is a taonga, and we needed to find a way to protect it. So we came up with a Google Drive, and we sought support from an IT person in England. The lead researcher arranged for this. Everything was password protected, and only the research team could access and can access this site via a confidential link. But it was an interesting way of using this Google Drive, because at the beginning, when we loaded up information about the project, it was very much about the macro details of each country. Items like the nature of early childhood education, the nature of the government, teacher ratios, all those quality indicators and so forth. And as the project progressed, that information became more detailed, more nuanced, because we knew more about the teachers, about the actual setting we were working with. We were working with one early childhood centre in each country. So in a sense, the online material evolved into this recursive that took on a life of its own once all the data was being added to it, and it became a really interesting space for us. Then recently, 4 of us met in England to have come together again for some real-time conversation, and this time to look at what each of us had progressed with, each of the teams, and to do some cross-case analysis. Just looking at what are your impressions of the data so far, and what do we share in common, but of course plays out in different ways because we are different places and with different people.
I didn't go, and so I had to be up till 3 o'clock in the morning to do my bit. But Maria went to England for that presentation, and it was great.
I'll do it. So I've got to say that Jean is such a trooper, because Jean had to Skype in from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. 3 nights in a row. And you had more energy than we did. It was incredible. We'd keep saying to Jean, "Are you okay, Jean?" She said, yeah, just keep going. In terms of our methodology, the way that we approached the research, as Jean said, we were very inspired by the work of Joseph Tobin and his research on preschool in 3 cultures. We took on his methodology of videocued multivocal ethnography, and this involved videotaping the interactions between 1-year-old children and their teachers in their early childhood space to create this video that was going to be a day in the life of 1-year-old children and their teachers. Our task was to edit that footage down to a 15-minute video, which I'll talk about shortly. It was one of our, it was another big challenge for us, because we ended up with about 5 hours of footage, because we didn't film everything, 5 hours of footage across a day, and then had to reduce that down to 15 minutes to represent a day in the life of the toddlers. What this meant was that video itself wasn't data, but what it elicited through responses by people viewing it. So our task was to create this video, then to show it to groups of people, including parents and families, and then to elicit their responses. And it's their responses that became the data, not the video footage itself. But we also are looking at the video footage as data by analysing what we're seeing in terms of children's experiences. So we also wanted to consider the child in all of this as well. So what this meant was the sense-making process of what was happening in the videos for each country took on this layering of different voices. So we had a series of voices from parents, from teachers who were part of the space, from teachers who were part of the Early Childhood Centre but not in the room, and then parents and teachers from the other 3 countries. And they would view the video and then just shared their initial responses to what they were seeing in terms of this notion of pedagogies of care. What we were asking ourselves is what meaning is given to these local narratives in different countries. And there are many different underpinnings for why someone assigns meaning to something. We became very interested not just in what we were seeing, but why we were seeing these practices. And if we go back to Joe Tobin's work, he talks a lot about the historical dimension to analysis. That often when you're looking at something, say a video footage of teachers and children interacting, the video itself is a look into the past. So these practices are representative of what has happened over time, but it's also a trigger for looking into a potential future. So that element of time became very important to us as the research progressed.
Many people perhaps don't know what we might mean by pedagogy, and I think that for me I'm always saying, well, let's share definitions, because things get misinterpreted or we don't know what we're on about. So for me it's actually about that relationship between teaching and learning, and as I've written there, the fact that teaching influences learning and learning influences teaching. I always think of Rockel in New Zealand, because teachers are learning from children, children are learning from teachers. So that was my sort of basis of understanding, and everybody seemed to agree that was something that they could relate to. And also that whole idea of a pedagogies of care, and I think again, if we have an educational framework, that does mean that we are professionals and we should consider our identity as teacher rather than a caregiver, and be able to articulate a pedagogy of care. Now, it's not a word it's sort of crept up on us in New Zealand. It's a European word. I like it. So I hope that you do too, actually. And Froebel, a little quote from him, let us learn from our children. The more I've read about Froebel, it's absolutely fascinating, and I think when you're doing your early studies that it's easy to gloss over somebody like Froebel with this name of being a sort of father of kindergarten, etc. But when you actually get into it, it's absolutely everything that underpins our ideas today. So, I think I was disappointed there was no definition in the current Pedagogy, but I knew I'd seen it in Pedagogy somewhere. And so I like this one, a shared understanding and a shared worldview, often expressed in accepted lifestyles and traditions. It's not a synonym for ethnicity. So there is that definition. But I think the comparative cross-national research projects by Tobin were grounded in an ethos of respect for cultural differences and diversity. So we also would like to attend to Tobin's cautionary advice that cultural traditions of childcare and education should be respected and valued, which isn't to say they should not also be critiqued and changed. As we will see in these different countries, they are changing according, as Maria said, historically by time and political shifts. And the differences across nations and cultures should be respected and not treated as deficits. So arguably this advice applies as much to the small cultures among settings and families as it does to the macro level.
Each researcher in each country invited one early childhood centre to participate in the research, and we chose these centres based on the reputation that they had for effective practice, using some online documentation and so forth, evaluation reports. But we make no claims that the one centre that we had in New Zealand, the one centre in Hong Kong and so forth is representative of the country or even of the local community. They are unique and quite independent of any other centre. So we just wanted to make that clear, that we make no claims about generalising these points for other settings. So this here is what we used to help guide us when we went into the Early Childhood Centre and what we were going to videotape. So you can imagine if you just left the videotape running for the whole day, you would over 2 days, you would get 16 hours of video footage. And we knew that we had to reduce that down to 15 minutes. So we had to be smart about this. So the team developed this storyboard of what we would typically see in an infant toddler setting in terms of significant events. But we also knew that these events would play out and look quite different across those settings. And also the order might have been different. So we used this across the team and adapted it to help guide us in our videoing while we were in the centre. One of the things that stood out to us was the area of the event of nappy changing. So it's a very important ritual for children. It's an intimate moment between teachers and that child. It's a very special time, but we also felt that it was an important time to capture some of that, whatever was possible for our project in terms of pedagogies of care. So this raised ethical issues for not only our ethics committee here at the University of Auckland, but also lots of discussion across the team. So what we decided to do, Jen and I, was to film a nappy change routine, or several of them, from a distance without being intrusive, because a camera can be quite intrusive, and just to capture more of the teacher's expressions and some of the child's interaction with that teacher without any of the actual intimate moments. And this allowed us to protect children's integrity and uphold that throughout the project, but capture something that we felt was really important. So, but the England team, the teachers videoed themselves in the setting, and they chose not to capture a nappy change routine. They didn't think it was necessary. The US team, they did capture a nappy change routine, similar to the way that we did, and
Hong Kong, not so much.
No, Hong Kong didn't capture that at all. Well, they might have filmed something, but they didn't use that in the final footage for the viewings. So we only really have nappy change routines from New Zealand and US.
The other thing I was curious about was how they would have responded to a conflict situation with children. So I didn't want that smoothed over and pushed aside. So I was quite keen on seeing how that happened.
We didn't actually talk about that, did we? We didn't talk about try and get a conflict situation because it's not something that you can plan for. But yeah, we were pleased to see it in action because you could then see the teacher's approach to that situation in the heat of the moment. And that's not often, easy to convey to others unless you are in that situation. So we didn't want to set it up, no. but we did capture it. Yes. Yeah, and it was great. This is the Early Childhood Centre in England, and I've got a few notes to share with you, just as a bit of background. Then you're going to see the teachers in actions with one-year-old children in that centre. So this is Selby Cottage. It is a converted community centre located in County Durham in the northeast of England. And in that area there are about 7,700 people, so it's a small town. The community itself is managed by the Durham County Council for children aged from birth up to 12 years of age. Well, just an interesting fact is that parents in England spend twice as much on childcare as they spend on food and drink every year. So it's, high costs go into this. In the actual Early Childhood Centre has an enclosed outdoor play space, and you're going to see that. In the under twos room, all staff had what's called baby room training. So it's this program that they have in England. They also employ a key person system, or what others might call a primary caregiving system or a key teacher system. There were 9 infants in this room, and the ratios were 1:3 for the under twos, 3 key staff and 1 apprentice. In terms of their parents, they have 3 annual parent evenings, and the teachers, the nature of their documentation was a lot of written and photographic records and daily updates in a closed Facebook group. What stood out to you in this video?
One of the things for me, Maria, is the difference in regulatory stuff that is behind that.
Yeah, in terms of the...
Well, we're still in that health department handbook say that children under 2 are not supposed to be slept within that low grade to the ground.
Yes.
Yes. So there are differences there, or like many centres here, we disregard something.
Yes.
Because we actually think it's silly.
Yeah, that's right. So there were wicker baskets on the floor in the summer house, but you also would have noticed they didn't have sheets. They had the blanket, just the blanket. Yeah, that might be a difference compared to where you are. What else did you notice?
Containing children.
What do you mean, Sue, by that?
Just kind of having them clipped into seats.
Like in the buggy that was outside.
Yeah,
Was one of them.
at the table.
At the table too. Yeah. Okay. So that sense of containment. Yeah.
As we respect our Maori culture, how we sleep, we put the children sleeps head to head.
Yes.
And, we have to have head and not facing them head and toes.
Yeah.
So
So it might look different in your centre because of those values?
Yes, values.
Yep, cultural values. Great.
Just noticing that it seemed that going outside was quite a prescribed thing in the morning especially. So we have free flow and where you'd like to be.
Yeah. So in this centre, you think they had quite a structured program?
And
Yep.
I mentioned that they could choose in the morning because
Yeah.
we go outside now and the doors, obviously that's what
Yes. Yeah. It looks like quite an effort to get outside, doesn't it? Instead of that free-flowing condition that some centres have. Yep. Right.
I was just interested in the plastic apron that they had on when they bend it all.
Yeah. What did you think of that?
It was just yes.
Interesting to note that. Did anyone else have a thought about that?
I thought it was institutionalising.
Yep.
To where, it's kind of medicalising almost, having a plastic apron.
Because they were wearing gloves. So you
No.
think the apron would go with gloves.
Yes.
And tongs and all that sort of stuff.
Yes,
So it was
yes.
kind of a bit tokenistic.
Yeah. Actually, it was interesting because what came up in some of the discussions with groups around the different countries was that we didn't wear aprons or wear gloves because that was their norm, and that's not the norm in some places in other countries. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether, I don't know, from your talk to the UK, I'm originally from the UK, and I don't know if the terminology or, the name for teacher or kayako or, we're known as kayako teachers.
Practitioner.
It's still nursery, when I was there, it was
Yeah.
like nurses,
Yes. These ones were early years practitioners as opposed, practitioners.
I found that quite interesting.
Yes. Well, the title, in terms of identity maybe, think about that, how you are referred to, how you refer to yourself.
I thought when the lady put the bibs on the children, it was a little disrespectful, just putting them over the top of their heads instead of getting down to their level and asking permission for them.
Right. Yeah. So the manner in which that was done, you felt that was disrespectful?
Yeah, I noticed that with like the sunscreen, like she didn't actually say we're going to put your sunscreen on now or anything like that. It was just like, did it?
Done.
Whereas I always asked.
I do agree.
Different practice, Leslie?
I didn't see a strong sense of empowerment of the children, that everything was done to them. There were no choices with the bibs or putting their shoes on, everything seemed to be done to the children.
Yeah.
As opposed to including them in the process. So
And
that strong sense, the image of the child seemed to be cognitively capable.
yeah, in this video, this scenario. I guess I need to say here too that this was just a window into some of their practices, and perhaps in other situations we may have seen some of those instances. But it was important to note too that the teachers filmed this. The teachers in the research project, they chose what was important to them in terms of pedagogies of care. So they've made those decisions about what is going to be part of that viewing around the world. So, in that sense, they've got ownership of it, but also it's interesting to see the norms and the values that may differ from yours.
I thought it was really interesting that the manager obviously held a very high regard, that she was part of the greeting in the morning for every family.
Yes.
And she was part of the unpacking
Yes, yeah. We saw that in the other countries as well, which was interesting. It's something that people noticed, that those even in, you know, of a senior position were still part and parcel of those relationships. Obviously a value of theirs, maybe. Yeah. Behind you? Yeah.
I just thought it was so wonderful to see a low toddler ratio in order to lots of time for each teacher to do like things.
Yeah.
To be done. 1 to 3 toddler ratio.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
So the outdoor area was quite open. There was no fixed structure. So that was interesting.
Great, thank you.
The guy areas, I think how the teacher, she was offering fruit to the child, like asking him, you want to have some apple, banana, and the food was, I mean, children, they were able to see food very clearly.
Yes.
Not the teacher was standing, and then
Yes.
she's asking, do you need this banana or an
Yeah.
apple? And
Yeah.
that's really good.
Yeah.
And in the street food, like the teacher, she brings one child, and then once he or she, I think, when he fell asleep, then she brings the other child,
Yeah.
which was really good.
Yes.
So her focus was on the child, and then the other is coming.
Yeah, we talked about, that was part of our discussion too, the sleep room transition, the sleep route transition was very calm. It was low stress, it was deliberate and intentional, and that's something to think about too in terms of what we saw in this video for that moment in time, that it was a very low stress situation in the sleep transition.
Yeah, I think maybe just picking up on that, there'd be lots of individual things that I could critique and say, oh, look that they had that, or but why did they do this? But that overall impression of the children, how were the children themselves, is very much on the positive side. So what it tells me is that sitting behind that, there are the relationships are working, and behind that, that's a lot harder to capture in one day's filming.
Yes, it is.
So I think it's one of those subtleties where there's a clue that's really worth something.
Yes, and we agree with that too. That what we talked about also was that, you know, the relational aspect of the teacher's pedagogy was very strong in all 4 countries, but it played out in different ways in the video footage, the videos that we saw. But we certainly shared this value for relationships as being central to the way we are with very young children, and that the children all seemed content and happy. They appeared that way, which says something's, you know, okay here. Yeah, so it's just differences.
I just think it's important to be mindful that any interaction that we saw was through the lens of a camera, and
Absolutely.
adults who would have been extremely conscious of their camera, of the purpose behind the videoing, and the potential audience.
Absolutely.
It puts a lot of pressure on
Good point. Yeah. And remember too, this was about reducing so many hours of footage and making decisions about what to cut out to get to your 15-minute video. So even that process in itself was ethical, because a lot of decisions were made about what to leave out and what to put in.
Following on from that comment, my ability to cope with strong English accent to be the same the other way around, but following the professional dialogue was quite difficult. But what I did get the sense of was that we're after children's happiness, but it was a fairly mono-dimensional way of talking, which I suspect is part of what you're picking up on, that when you're in front of the camera, you're not likely to problematise these experiences, try to sort of, but that may have happened in parts that I couldn't actually
pick up.
hear. But I think that would have been one of the things I'd have really enjoyed hearing, would have been a sense of either things that moved at different speeds, rhythms that sort of sped up and slowed down, and that way of talking about happiness that has some sort of, you know, multi-dimensionality.
And substance,
Not sort of a slightly cliche version.
There are a couple of interesting phrases, or the same phrase used twice actually. Oh, you've been a mucky pup. Does anybody know about that? It took us a while to work that one out.
And the teachers in this video were very nervous about the rest of the world hearing their accents. They knew they had a very strong accent. They were worried about how they would come across in the videos. So, you know, the early part of their filming is perhaps there's a bit of performance there. We've got to also take that into account. Yeah. Kamal? Yes? Which part?
Primary care.
Oh, no, it's not.
I don't know really what the extent of it would be.
No, my understanding of that is no, it's not it's not in all places that you'll find the key person system that they called it. That was based on the actual training that they had, the education that they had. Yeah. Okay, one more?
I think the relationships with the parents were really important as well. They
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of time spent with the parents finding out about what their child's evening's been like, and making those connections with other people.
Yeah.
And those transitions were amazing. Like, there wasn't an upset child there.
Yeah.
You know, the crying and he was upset, but he calmed really quickly. He knew the routines,
Yeah.
people, including the cooks.
Yes, yeah.
And then the farewells, you know,
Yeah, lovely.
the parents know what learning they've been doing during the day, how they slept, all of those.
The team did stress the importance of sharing information with parents at the end of the day, beginning of the day, not just sharing that information, but building the relationship at the same time. So they did stress that as an important time, and it came through in the footage. Yeah. Okay, really interesting. Yeah.
We are looking at a place that has a maximum of 9 children.
Yes.
in it.
Yes. That's right.
And a ratio of 1 to 3 plus.
Yeah.
Which is a requirement in the UK, 1 to 3,
Yeah.
as opposed to ours 1 to 5.
And only 9 children.
Yeah. On that,
Yeah,
in that
small
room.
group.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got quite a lot ahead of us, so I'm going to move on and just introduce you briefly to Bloomington in Indiana, where there are 84,465 people, and it's a university campus centre, and the cost of the care is borne by the family, and it's very expensive. I think we take for granted a lot of the funding we receive. I mean, it's unbelievable to think that you'd have to pay full and no funding at all. So I find this quite fascinating. Ratio is 1 to 4, 8 in the group with 2 lead teachers plus the aide for peak times, 1 teacher with a master's degree and the other near completion of her master's, a 1-year-old room, but continuous care up till the age of 3. In terms of influence on their pedagogy, hybrid models, a lot of Gerber, a lot of Pickler, and then DAP, which is developmentally appropriate practice, very big in the States, and attachment and relationship theories, child-centred and family-centred. They offer breakfast and lunch, very, very detailed documentation and assessment. The centre is in a converted apartment building on the lower level of the university accommodation. Parents are mostly staff, with some outsiders to the university. There are state regulations and a general push for primary care and continuity of care. I forgot to mention to you earlier, the seasons were different. They were all in summer and ours was filmed in winter. So I was interested in the previous one in the UK with the shoes on and the sandpit, even though it was summer. I don't think we would do that here in New Zealand. Yeah. Yes, yes. There's a lot of thought that's gone in. Obviously, part of their pedagogy, they're very carefully planned. That little toy, the rocking one, it will only work if there's cooperation. So it's a sort of cooperative piece of equipment. Yeah. I think there was, but we didn't see it, did we, Maria? No. The separate one. Which question was the last one?
Or the comment.
Yep. Yeah, I will. Okay, so that was about the environments. And was there a separate sleep room? We didn't actually see that. Obviously, they had the one cot in the playroom, but yeah, we didn't see the sleep room.
Didn't they come back into the area and children were just waking up?
Yes, just do a little bit of it. No, they definitely had a separate sleep space, separate room that we didn't see. Yeah.
I'm kind of interested I'm interested in both videos in how they follow children's lead. So children are pointing a lot in both videos, and this group of teachers were definitely introducing lots of ideas to the children. So I was observing them introducing the way new information through song and language and words. But still children are pointing, and it's really hard to know whether the teachers, it might be just how the video is being edited, but how the teachers following that worked. And in both videos, children were doing this, but there didn't seem to be any follow-up. And I think that's something for us to be thinking about in our practice as well. So yeah.
That's a good observation, that there didn't seem to be any direct response that we could see. I noticed they integrated things like the animal, you've got the kangaroo, so they're actually sort of putting words to things but not really taking it that much further. I think there's such a big emphasis on the nurturing in this one. It was hard to pick up on just what you're saying. Where was it going to lead to? Yeah. Somebody really keen.
I was struck by the word emergency, which said 3 times
Oh, yes.
as soon as they were going outside.
Yes, so that was the emergency backpack. So when they went outside, they had to have the emergency backpack on, and in it was a list of names, first aid kit and all of those sorts of things. They also held a lot of drills to get them prepared in case of earthquake, strangers coming, fire, and it seemed to be a big emphasis on preventing or supporting children in emergency.
So the reflective mirrors in the space, was that something you saw in that was present in other centres?
That's an interesting question. Reflective
Just
mirrors.
a small one in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And was that about surveillance of teachers or children or
No, I don't think it was so much the surveillance. In the Hong Kong one, you'll see a camera, which we didn't see in the American one. Yeah, that's a good, interesting point about the mirrors. I guess sometimes just simply to make the space look bigger. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. On that one, that I know that was one of the things in Wellington we had advocated as a solution for centres where they were saying we have hard to observe spaces, so we can't let children go there. You've got a mirror, you can.
Yes.
It opens your space up.
Yes, that's a good point.
It would be a thing that's actually real aid to giving children more freedom of use of spaces and not feeling observed, but yet you know where they are.
Yes, did you hear that?
They'll be doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
I like this one included some times when the child was a bit unsettled, and it kind of pointed out that wasn't so much in the first one.
Yes.
And in that sense, you could see the way that the teacher responded.
Yes.
And one of the ways was like, yeah, I hear you, I see this, you don't feel happy right now.
Yes.
Rather than kind of just directly.
Yes, he was just saying that the acknowledgement was there of how the children were actually feeling. Again, that gets back to that nurturing response. There was very much a close physical touch in this particular one. Yep.
I was wondering around the rules and the safety aspects of things, and how I wondered whether that affected. It seemed like there weren't a lot of opportunities for risk taking, and that teachers were always very close to the children. And I know that there are a lot of regulations that, and whether that impacts on the way that their image of the child.
It's interesting. Yeah. I think it is very litigious, the American society. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of regulations and documenting everything. Yeah. Yes, yes, it's very, very noticeable, and obviously they selected those moments to be representative of the the time in the 15 minutes as well.
So, like they went to the playground, but like the playground is a shared playground, or just like they have certain time of being there? Like they went in the afternoon and in the morning, but we didn't see other children.
No.
It seems like a big playground.
Yes, I think they had access to that playground, didn't they? Yeah. Yeah.
Shared.
Yeah. But good access to it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I love seeing other environments. These two videos, I'm interested to see the last two, but it's that indoor-outdoor flow that we are really pioneers in the way that our centres are now designed, and the doors are open and we're in and out constantly throughout the day. So these two videos, I appreciate it's just two centres. Keen to see the next two, but I'd love to see some indoor-outdoor flow.
Yes. Yes, the indoor-outdoor flow is very different to the way we have it in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Having a free access, not having to stop and put shoes on. Yeah. Anything else?
Actually knowing where Chester Street is in England and knowing its economic situation, I do think that you could see with the resources, etc., that there is an equity, possibly, between those communities.
What did you notice particularly?
Particularly outside, you know, they had in Chester Street they used the milk crates and I suppose things we would call loose parts.
Yes.
You wouldn't see it necessarily as an inequity.
Yes.
And I thought inside as well, the amount of equipment wasn't quite the same and possibly of the same quality.
Right.
You know, in the Chester Street one, we saw the dining room. But when I think about the rest of the equipment that we saw indoors, it wasn't possibly, the same quality, quantity, range of materials, those kinds of things.
Could be choice, again, you know, as to how much you provide or whether children find things for themselves. It's lovely to see that pink material, orangey pink material used. And I always love to see things like that because then the children are in control and can determine how they play. Yeah.
But I just think that is a cultural, that is a part of your culture.
Yes.
And as I said, knowing Chester Street personally, I know it's of a low economic.
Yes.
Very low economic
Yes.
community.
Yes.
And I just don't know enough about the American one and what they do. But, you know, being university, I don't know whether it's catering to university students or university lecturers.
I would think the staff and students, I'm sure it would be both. Yeah. It's interesting about the provision of resources and the reasons why. I thought some of the resources in the American one, actually the books looked like they had been very well used. But a lot of it was coming from the teachers, the body play with the song on the legs and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, to think about the way the resources are presented and used. Yeah, it's a good thing to look out for in all of the videos.
We actually, just as a quick discussion a bit while I was going on, we actually felt, we'd just like to say, that we actually felt a lot of authenticity around the American one, which kind of surprised me because I'm from the UK and I went into it expecting to see some English stuff that would resonate with me, but I actually resonated more with the American centre.
Yes.
Which is why I found it really authentic. Like the song, I actually did that one with my kids as well. The John D one. Yeah, just the way we call it sportscasting. I don't know if that's
yes.
Everyone knows of, but I've heard that a lot.
Yes. Yes. Yes, she was saying how she engaged more authentically with the American one, which is surprising, expecting that New Zealand and UK, there may be closer links. I guess it just illustrates, doesn't it, how unique every centre is, every setting is, and how difficult it is to present and gauge information about just one centre. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yep. Better move on. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of free choice in the play though. Yeah, which is lovely to see.
Thank you. We're just going to move on to the next video, which is the video in Hong Kong. This one is an early childhood centre. They described it as a model centre, one that they wanted other centres to aspire towards. So it was a centre that had children from birth up to kindergarten age to 7. Infant toddler care and education and care in Hong Kong is a very strange phenomenon, so we were told. It's not usual for babies to be in an early childhood setting. They are often in their own homes, looked after by their grandparents, more so today, or by a domestic helper. So there's only a few spaces for infants and toddlers across Hong Kong in early childhood settings. Most children that go into early childhood are kindergarten age, so three onwards. There's no government subsidy for early childhood education, but the childcare is affordable. In this particular centre, there were 14 children in the group with 2 lead teachers. Both had a bachelor's degree in ECE, plus a teaching assistant, and they wanted to stress that that also included the janitor. The curriculum they were guided by was called SIME, which is S-I-M-E. This is a multi-sensory curriculum, and it was about stimulation, interaction, motivation, and experience. Most of the parents in the centre are the staff of the university, because the centre is attached to the university, and some from outside. There is minimal contact time for teachers, but a lot of expectation that they will document. They have to document the children's activity, in different domains and so forth, and they take photos all the time to support that documentation.
I noticed how their indoor play space seemed very limited of resources that a lot of centres here would have, like blocks and train tracks and stuff, to have a lot of like ride-on toys.
Yep, they call that the gross motor room. So a room specifically set up to, help foster some of those developmental skills. But it was deliberately called the gross motor room. Yeah.
There was like no free play outside. It was just full of structured like exercise activity, like stand in a line, wait for your turn.
Yeah. So some of they're actually required to implement 20 minutes of structured play per day, and that was an example of that. The play inside the gross motor room was the unstructured play that children could therefore make choices. But there was an emphasis on teaching life skills and teaching children to, in terms of their bodies. Bodies are very important. And knowing how to coordinate the body, but also the life skills. And I'm just going to kind of veer into the self-help skills that you would have seen a lot of. The teeth brushing, the feeding oneself, learning how to feed oneself.
Temperature too.
The temperature taking. So that stood out to us, and that was explained as required for health inspections. In this centre, it was done with children in the morning, before sleep, after sleep, and before they go home. And that was explained to us more in terms of the macro issues of the dense population and the spread of disease. So this was about preventing some of that and keeping an eye on children. If there was an outbreak, it would have huge consequences on, massive groups. So it's something that they did pay close attention to. And from what we learned through our Hong Kong researcher, it is a norm, even in schooling, to take your own temperature several times a day and to note that down. And she thought it was strange that we didn't do that in New Zealand. So that's their cultural norm, and some of those macro issues come into play there.
It seemed very structured, hand-on-hand stuff.
Yes.
Going on, all toileting at the same time.
Yep. So I think they explain that to us in terms of making sure children acquire particular skills as they lead into being able to look after themselves in a competitive environment. This is what they say that parents are really interested in, that being happy is about being able to compete, being able to survive in that type of environment. Yeah, it is interesting.
I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. This is my understanding. I've watched 3 videos. They are following their curriculum.
They're following their
curriculum.
Yes.
They're following their curriculum. We follow our curriculum.
Exactly.
Yes.
So there's nothing right and wrong.
Exactly.
That's right.
They think what they follow, they're right.
Yep.
Yes.
They might be, they don't be agree with our curriculum.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
There's nothing right or wrong, but we can take good things from.
So the point made here is that the differences that we're seeing, and I'll add this in, they're often in relation to our own norms and values, but because every place is different and they're inspired by different curriculum influences, philosophies even, and societal values, and their own ways of being, the kind of adult they want the children to become, if I can say that, those things shape those practices in some way. And so what's usual for them, typical for them, might feel quite not atypical for us. But there's nothing wrong or right about this. This is what we were learning in the project. It was opening our eyes to, we're just culturally different. A lot of this is underpinned by cultural values and, how they see children's futures. And this is why that historical element to this project is really important, looking at the video footage for what practices have accumulated over time and why, what underpins those values.
Okay, I want to add just a few things. Because I'm from mainland China, because this is in Hong Kong, so it's quite different. Because in Hong Kong, everything is very expensive. For example, a 60 square apartment costs $2 million New Zealand dollars. So that's why they don't have much, outdoor play areas. But in mainland China, they have very, large and spacious play area for the children, and they can go outside and free play. Not like you have to stay in a queue and not like it's kind of different.
Yeah.
And also in China, normally the children they don't go to daycare. Before 3, they stay at home with mom or grandparents, stay with the family, and then start daycare. They start kindergarten at 3 years old.
Thank you. New Zealand, in Auckland, which is our largest city, of course, the ratios in this centre are 1 to 3, 2 full-time degree qualified registered teachers and a teacher aide supported with a wider teaching team to get continuity of care, 10 children up to 2, detailed assessment, documentation and online blog. And Te Whāraki's framework, obviously, the notion of being responsive to children is ingrained in practice, leading to focusing closely on children's interests. For example, the exploration of the moon in terms of shape, a phenomenon in song, literacy and writing and multimedia, inspired by the Reggio philosophy. Wow, just quickly 1 or 2 points. What did you like there? Familiar, probably, to you? I loved the fact that somebody mentioned empowerment before, because I think you can easily see the empowerment that's happening there. A lot of respect, yes. Along with the risk-taking, there is definitely a lot of risk-taking going on as well. Patience. A calmness too, yes. Yes, people noticed that the teachers, those in other countries noticed they were thoughtful and calm and very professional. They're amazed that they were dressed as teachers, as they might be in a school. Yeah. Not a uniform or an apron. Thank you. Just a few implications. I mean, for me, as I worked through it, I began to realise it wasn't about what I was learning about others, it was about learning about ourselves. And so I think I really think that's important, finding that we learn more about others, but we learn more about ourselves. In terms of the culture and times, it gives us a chance, obviously, to revisit and to consider a historical and sociological framework. 20 years ago, in my experience in New Zealand, there definitely was that focus on tasks, and today it is about more having a philosophy that might involve cooperation and collaboration. It's interesting to see how ideologies shift over time, and think of China, from the little that I've learned. Dewey's ideas of progressivism, progressive liberalism was very popular in China, was the individual child, the focus of the one-child policy. But as that's changed, there seems to be more of the social responsibility and that loving control that you see with the teachers. And so I found that quite fascinating to see the changes that have been reflected through the shifts in Chinese policies. So yeah, the nappy changing today, we would actually have a theory around that. That was why I was keen for New Zealand to show that. We could probably move on. I think in the West, we've certainly got a lot more emphasis on academic needs, and so we're getting much more, I think, in New Zealand of beyond literacy. We're getting science and mathematics, etc., at an early stage. This is just an example of the way we're going to look at the Froebelian principles. They certainly mesh brilliantly with New Zealand. I won't go over it because I think we really have run out of time, but that's just the sort of frameworks that we're playing around with at the moment. So it'll be interesting if you could come and chat to us about what you might be taking away from this session. Has anybody got anything they would like to add finally about what you've seen and what sort of meaning that might have for you? Linda?
Can I ask something, Jean? You started with the outline idea of pedagogy, and you know, these are teacher-led centres. And I'm just wondering where infants are when they are with untrained people. You know, is there a pedagogy?
Yes. Yes, there must be, because if we, well, in my opinion, there must be, because if we have a curriculum, we need a pedagogy. If we've got a curriculum, which we have, before 1996, nope, we didn't have one. But now we do, and I believe that the educational framework must lead us to know, evaluate what it is that we're doing. We're not just babysitting, in my opinion. And that's how about you, Maria?
In terms of, well, there was teaching assistants in the footage, and they were emulating some of the practices that the qualified teachers were modelling, I guess, in that sense. So they're being well supported towards the pedagogies. I think it's a really interesting question. In terms of who does a pedagogy belong to? Is it those with a qualification, or anyone engaged in certain practices? Is it about the practice, the knowledge behind the practice? I think it would make a really interesting debate, Linda. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. That's great.